Okay, what is a data center? Basically, it's a very large operating facility. It's not a warehouse. It's not passive. It's a large operating facility that takes a tremendous amount of energy, and it has, as you'll see in a few minutes, an awful lot of equipment inside, very expensive equipment, and they run 7/24. Now you ask, well, what does a data center do? Well, anyone who uses phone, streams on the internet, streams on your TV, your communications, you do business or banking online, they're all there. Everything's going through the data center. So that's just kind of what's going on with data centers. They come in generally three categories. Hyperscale is kind of what we're talking about tonight, because that's the large multi-acre facilities. There's like 2 full sites here in Western County. There's also the enterprises, usually private business, and then there's the smaller ones. Like there's one in Wichita, it's 10,000 square foot. We're going to be talking about millions of square feet. Investments, as you can see from here, they do range depending on what is being built and where. You build the buildings, the infrastructure, the cooling, the generators, and everything that go into it can be anywhere from $5 to $15 billion. They usually build in phases. The hardware that goes inside, it's tens of billions of dollars, and it can go up to 100 if you're talking about the really large facilities. The technology is changing rapidly, and I'll show you a chart a little later on that kind of explains how can they keep using so much power and land, and you can start to see why. That's at the end of the year is where all the data centers go in the United States. The big states that have it is Virginia and Texas, and they were early on. They wanted to get in. It's a lot of money being spent. They're having somewhat of a buyer remorse right now. We'll hear more about those issues. Some of the problems they first started out, they gave large tax abatements. They weren't zoned right. They were zoned for offices. These are operating sites. Huge power consumption, multiple pieces of equipment, and they don't employ that many people. That's what I'm talking about. So, when you talk about a hyperscale data center, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the big ones. Well, some are owned by the big five, the Alphabets, the Metas, Microsoft, and that. There's a lot of third parties getting into this right now. People who have been building data centers, but they're getting into it now because there's so much money out there. Iconic call it the gold rush. It's the modern day gold rush. And as you'll see, the top 5 technical companies are planning this year alone to spend $650 billion. That's just the top 5. And $3 trillion by 2030, 31. So it's a huge amount of money. Everybody wants to get a piece of the action, and that's causing some of the problems. The scale of it, I'm not going to go through all the detail, but they can be as high as 1,500 acres. And as I said, the infrastructure, the servers, the racks, the computers, they can exceed 100,000 servers in a. The power they use is tremendously large. Anywhere from 20 megawatt, it's kind of a small one. They go up to a gigawatt. For comparison, if anybody knows about Wolf Creek nuclear plant in eastern Kansas, that's 1.3 gigawatts. They can use a whole power plant in one facility. And of course, the other thing I want you to leave here with is all that power goes into making their product, but their product is digital. All that power goes into heat. So now you've got to take all that heat out for the equipment to work. And so you'll see in a little bit, the amount of energy expended in cooling is tremendous, and that's where the water question is coming. The other thing about their power, last year they were 4% of the U.S. energy consumption. That's a lot. They're going to keep growing at the rate they're forecasted to be 8 to 12%, which would be a pretty amazing amount of electrical power. So, what are the basic components? I'm not going to go through it all, but I will tell you, when you have an investment like this, and they are continuously running 724, if they shut down, some of these will lose $500,000 an hour in revenue and earnings. So they have a big expenditure that they want to pay off. So they're going to put a lot of redundancy in. So with power, not only do you want 2 different supplies from the outside, from different substations, you're going to have backup generation, you're going to have uninterruptible supply. I mean, not mean a lot to most of you, but let me guarantee you, it's a lot of investment to keep that place from having even a blip in the power supply. Cooling is the next thing, and there's different technologies in cooling. With water being a big thing, and I gotta try to get to that. Construction can be 5 to 20 years. Commissioning can take months. And there's gonna be a lot of activity there. And of course, you got staff. It could be 1,500 people when they're first building, the first phase. And they usually build in phases. Infrastructure, there could be a big demand on the public infrastructure. Roads, power, generation, distribution, and that. And all the concerns I have listed up there, everybody else is gonna kind of talk about that. This is one in Port Washington, Wisconsin. The whole site is 670 acres. Now this is their rendition, which will look very nice, I'll tell you. But when it's finished, it's 460 acres will be developed. There's 3.2 million square feet under those buildings. 75 acres is under the building. That's how big these data centers are. And then they have a lot of cooling. Now this one is going to be using air cooling instead of water evaporation, so there's just hundreds of towers. These are refrigeration buildings. And so that just gives you a size. So think about going out in the country, looking at a building, and that's a side view, but it's going to cover a whole section. These buildings, the top one, it shows you they can be 45 foot tall when they put all the louvers and stuff on top to try to knock the noise down. And the side view of the other ones here, over here, right here, you'll see these tall stacks. Those are generators. That site's going to have over 50 generators, so if they have power problems, those generators are going to kick in. And those stacks are 61 foot tall. Here's all those cooling towers, you can look at the pictures on the wall later. Those are 60 foot tall. And they're very noisy, and there's going to be hundreds of those. Here's another one. This is a Microsoft facility in Wisconsin also. This is a very large facility. This is their AI, their new technology. But again, it's 1.5 million square feet. You can see all the cooling that's required. And all this in here, those are generators. And then there's another building over there. To build this, I want you to think about construction. They drove 47 miles of pilots to support those buildings. Those buildings are huge. 10 acres is 450,000 square feet. Their building is 650,000 square foot, and they're putting multiple buildings. So 120 miles of underground cable. A lot of this stuff is buried. And then 72 miles of process pipe. The next building, that is a separate building that is just doing the data storage and simple computing for the other building. Okay? And so this facility is rated at about 600-700 megawatts. It has 172 of those 20-foot fans on that site. So you can imagine what that's going to sound like, sitting 60 foot here. And then the last chart I got of a building, this is one in Ohio. And the thing that I wanted to show on this one, if you look to the left, that's all construction area, what they've been building. And this project was built in 2 phases. They've got evaporative cooling. If you look at on the right-hand side, you'll see towers that are emitting mist. That's evaporative. And if you get into a evaporative cooling situation, they use 1 million gallons a day for every 100 megawatt. And so if you got a 500 megawatt facility, you're going to use 5 million gallons of water a day just to evaporate to remove the heat. And that is kind of a summary of what a data center is. There's a lot of questions. I'm just trying to get it, but here's the thing that I want to wrap up on. Then I got to move on to the next subject. And that is, these companies have moved in real quickly. And if you look at Virginia, Texas, Georgia, wherever you look, transparency is always an issue. The application shows up, and that's when people find out they're coming in. And then you get a few weeks to respond. The initial ones didn't have good zoning, didn't have good regulations. There was no long-range view of what the impact is. And like I said, it's kind of like the gold rush. Everybody wants a piece of this, and one of my biggest concerns is there's going to be a shakeout in this industry. And there's going to be idle assets in some way. So, now let's talk about power real quick. The industry likes to look at power in this way. Before the meter and after the meter. Before the meter, that's where your generation companies are, whether it's renewable energy, storage, and that. Behind the meter, that's on the site. A lot of sites are wanting to build their own power plants. Some are on site, some are not. An example is in Independence, Missouri, there's a large 400-acre site. It's going to be 800 megawatts. They're building a 1.3 gigawatt plant on the old Blue Valley plant. They take power off that. Pampa, Texas is building a 2 gigawatt power plant that will service the grid. I was talking about hyperscale. Generally, the industry looks at it in 100 megawatt increments. 100 megawatts is enough to supply up to 80,000 homes. So if you put in an 800 megawatt, that's 600,000 homes. 60 to 70% of the power goes into the computing part. 30 to 40% goes into the cooling part, and there's miscellaneous others. Typically, a small one they can usually build about 40 acres, a little bit more. But the ones we've been talking about are mostly 400 to 800 megawatts. Anyone 500 to 800 to as high as 1,500 acres. So they want a lot of assets, they want a lot of room, they want to put space in between. So if you look at the U.S. consumption, that's the forecast for the next 5 years. It's going to be 125% of today. And it's roughly 30 gigawatts of power has to be put in. This is probably outdated. The latest publications show that it's going to be even worse than that and more. So there's going to be a huge demand on the grid, huge demand on generators. Everybody sees it's possible. The issue is bringing on new natural gas fire. It takes you 4 to 6 years to do. What's the power requirements for a data center? They got to be very reliable. They want very good purchase power agreements, the PPAs. Redundancy in everything. They want redundancy because, again, if they have a blip and they shut down, not only do they lose revenue, but you can damage the equipment. Those servers and those chips are very, very sensitive. You have uninterruptible power supply, you have generators on site, you have different design codes. Up there it shows N+1. N+1 means you design your plant. So if something were to, of the major items were to fail, you have a backup. We lose power, we got generators. We got backup power supply, we got battery storage. If you're a 2N, you're probably government. That means you duplicate it. The other thing they will design for, and I'm going to show you in a minute, is this issue about design for growth. They will put in cooling 60% more than they need right now because they're planning on growth in the technology or even their footprint. So this is the one you're going to love. Why are data centers using so much electricity? Why are they using so much power? One of the things I didn't mention earlier was there's currently 4,000 data centers in the United States. The plan is to add 3,000 over the next 4 to 5 years, of which 500 plus are hyperscale. You start doing the math, you go, where's all this power coming? But why do they need it? The issue is there's something called Moore's Law in the electronics industry. And basically all it says is every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip has doubled. This has been going on for decades. And so now you're down to nanometers, 5 to 10 nanometers. The human hair is 80,000. So you can see the density and speed of computing, 2 million calculations a second. And all that takes energy, and all that energy goes into heat. So exponentially, the heat demand is rising. As the chips get better, the speed gets better. So every year or two, there's a new chip coming out. And every chip is maybe a little more efficient per compute, but it takes more energy because it does 3 times the number of computations. So it takes more energy. Cooling requirements real quick. Final considerations. Computing, I just talked about it. On the top, as you move down, they become more energy intensive. That means more heat, which means more water. The cooling selection, if you use just water, 100 megawatt will use 1 million gallons a day. But if you do closed loop, now you got to put it all through the air. You got to double or more the number of pieces of equipment. The power goes up 10 to 15%, and you got a lot of noise. So there's always a trade-off, and that's what they're dealing with. And then new technology has new chemistry, new chemicals, not all proven. So now you got environmental impact, and you got health, which is one of the reasons, like you said, one of our areas is over Equispan. Why would you ever put something like this over Equispan? Surface recharge. If anything gets away, it's going into Equispan. Cooling technologies, very simple. You can use the old water evaporator. Anybody remembers the Gordon Evans, the old water tower and all that? That was just water evaporating. 80% of the water you pulled out was going up in the sky. It's much cheaper, it's much more efficient, but it has limits, and that is if we don't have enough water, and that's becoming one of the biggest issues across the country. Closed loop, you basically have water that's circulating in loops, and we'll go over here later, we can talk about it, it's kind of complicated, but they're just basically using air fans like your air conditioner, and using the air to take the heat out. And this is where you end up with hundreds of fans, 20 foot or more in diameter. And they still have limits when we get to the peak time. The investment goes up. As water goes down, the investment goes up, the cost to operate, and other factors. New technology, you'll hear about it maybe, you've been reading. It's liquid cooling. It is where they take the chip or the server and stick it in fluid. It's a special fluid. It all sounds great, it's more efficient, they can go even faster. Trouble is, you still got to get the heat out of that fluid, you still got to put it outside the atmosphere. So that takes a tremendous amount of power. So the power concerns, it's pretty straightforward. Can you generate enough? Can we handle the expansion? Is there distribution in our grid? Those are not easy things to resolve. What about the cost of the community? When they were expanding in Virginia and Ohio, that grid network put in $9 billion over a few years to support data centers. Well, since they were excluded from paying from it, the average customer in Western Ohio and Western Maryland ended up paying $14 to $18 a month more on their bills because they were having to pay for that. So that's the kind of things that's got to be studied and put in place. Reliability is an issue. These modern AI centers, they are just unbelievable. They're all pushing 1 gigawatt of power. They will take a big power plant by themselves. So you can see the strain. And so as you talk about it, and then one of my biggest concerns is there's two of them. First of all, everybody wants to think there's going to be overbuilding potentially. And there's going to be a shakeout. Some of these companies are not going to succeed, those third parties. They don't have the balance sheet. They're going to probably shake out. Communities can end up forking a lot of bill. The other thing, in the next 10 years, there could be a heck of a technology breakthrough that reduces that energy. There's things being worked on now, so that's kind of where it's at. So, hopefully I didn't confuse you, and I'll ask questions later. Okay? John?